October 19th meeting of the Finance and Administration Committee to order. First item of business would be to receive the minutes of the September 30th meeting. Has everyone had an opportunity to review them? Okay, I see a few nods here. Can I entertain a motion to receive the minutes of September 30 as presented?
Motion to accept the minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Fay. All those in favor of accepting the minutes as presented, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, the motion is accepted and approved. We move on to item number 2B, which be recommendations for the use of the American Rescue Plan funding, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Matt Hart, Town Manager. Good evening, everyone. Good to see you online tonight. So the committee will recall we had a good discussion last month, and we all agreed that it would be a good course of action to continue this item for discussion this evening. Again, just a little bit of a refresher last time around, and you'll find these materials loaded in board docs for tonight's meeting. Last time around, we presented the council with a proposal of $18.8 million in projects to be funded through rescue plan monies, another $6.6 million in projects that would be funded through municipal bonds. Of the $18.8 million, that included $1 million in assistance for arts and cultural and human services related nonprofit organizations, as well as another $1 million in assistance to small businesses. Let me start with those two categories. We are still working to develop an application that could be used for both of those sectors. We're making very good progress. We should be prepared. We'll have something more complete to review with you at your next meeting following the election. As we talked about last time, once you are comfortable with our initial plan, we do think we should take our ideas. We should meet with stakeholder groups from the small business community as well as from the nonprofit community to share the concepts and ideas and to get their input, get their reaction, and I'm sure they'll have good suggestions for us as well. So that would leave $16.8 million in municipal projects. We would recommend that the committee focus its attention on those initiatives now. We also think a public engagement component would be helpful there, at least at a certain level, maybe one or more public information sessions with members of the community to discuss our plans and to solicit their good ideas. We would recommend public information sessions as opposed to surveys only. You know, we think it would be good to get people into a virtual room where we can make a presentation and have a more sustained dialogue. And we also discussed last time around how we would fund the $6.6 million in projects that are scheduled for municipal bonding. Many of those, and there are 5 of them altogether. Several of those are already built, like the Eisenhower Pool, for example. They are already built into our approved capital improvement program, but they're some years out. So what we are recommending and what we talked about last time is we could use more rescue plan monies for projects that are clearly reimbursable under that category for things like stormwater improvements, et cetera. And that would free up bond funding within the early years of our existing capital improvement program that could be redirected to fund these projects at an earlier point in time. So that's my quick overview, Mr. Chairman. I would pause there and ask Mr. Privatera or Ms. Lewis if there's anything they wanted to add.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Mr. Privatera or Ms. Lewis, do you have anything you'd wish to add at this point?
Good evening, everyone. Pete Privatera, Finance Director. I think Town Manager Hart gave a very good overview of where we stand. I just wanted to point out that some of the projects that are being proposed are, some of them are straight out purchases of equipment that would only require a simple appropriation, and then we can pursue those. Some of the projects would require going out to bid, because there are multiple components, especially in, accessibility improvements, pond restorations. So I just wanted to point out that if council were to make any decisions, there are some projects that we can move on quickly. Others would take a little longer. And especially if we are going to amend the capital budget by moving up some projects, deleting others, adding more money to some, that amendment process will be, for all intents and purposes, just like adopting a new capital budget, because we have to go through the same process as we would through the budget adoption process for the capital plan because of the dollar value that we're talking about. So I just wanted to alert everyone to that fact. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Privatera. And Ms. Lewis, I saw indicated that she did nothing further to add. At this point, I'll see if anybody has any questions or comments on this portion of where we are so far.
Yes, Mr. Chair, this is Mary Fay. May I, through you? I think we're being very prudent and very wise with how we're spending, and I think the recommendations are very good and spot on. My question would be for the small business, seeing that it's about $1 million, or maybe exactly $1 million, how would you recommend that we disperse that, and who would be eligible and things like that? I know it's a little early probably to know those types of things, but it's, when you think about how many small businesses West Hartford has, it's not going to go super far. So I was just wondering what kind of approach we'd be looking at to make sure that we funded, what we needed to. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fay. I don't know, I think the manager would like to respond to that, and Mr. Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Matt Hart, Town Manager. Thank you, Councilor Fay, for your good question. So yes, we're recommending an initial allocation of $1 million here. You may certainly want to adjust that over time. Some of the decisions, we're going to be looking for council to make, but our recommendations, at least at this early stage, that we focus on small businesses, and that would include businesses that are headquartered here in West Hartford, certainly, as well as certain local franchises. And in terms of categories, they would need to be reimbursable under the grant criteria. But we're thinking of two broad categories, perhaps three. One would be relief, what we call pandemic relief. So if a company has experienced economic losses related to the pandemic and they haven't been reimbursed through another source of funding, like the PP, the Payroll Protection Grant, they could potentially apply for some relief through this source. And then secondly, we would also have money available to assist them with new initiatives that are responsive to the pandemic and also reimbursable under the grant criteria. And those could include facade improvements, certain improvements to their infrastructure, as well as things focused on their workforce, such as recruitment and retention of employees. So those are some of the categories we're thinking right now. Again, we want to do a little more work on it and get something in front of you, but you're going to have an opportunity to adjust it, based on what you think is most appropriate.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Ms. Fay, anything further?
No, that was a great explanation. Again, I think we're definitely headed in the right direction, and I appreciate that. And I know it's a little bit early in the process to know everything, but I'm happy to help however I can. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fay. Mr. Sweeney.
Thank you through you, Mr. Davidoff. Matt, can you explain the wayfinding signage line in here?
Mr. Hart?
Yes, Matt Hart, Town Manager. Thank you, Councilor Sweeney. Yes, this is something that, we've been talking about as an economic and development initiative for a couple of years now, and I imagine the mayor would want to weigh in as well. If you drive around town, you'll note a couple of things. Number one, we don't have a consistent pattern, an updated pattern of wayfinding signage in our major commercial areas and elsewhere in town. So we'd like to come up with a more consistent pattern, but also we've got some newer developments that have occurred. We want to be able to point people, provide clear directional signage to things like parking structures, etc. And really, this can facilitate economic development and business in town. It's a way to not only provide directions, but it's also a way to market our community. If we have a consistent theme and a consistent message, and many communities around the country have successfully done this. Again, it's something we've been looking at for a period of a couple of years now, and we think that this would be an appropriate funding source. I'm not sure if the mayor has anything she'd like to add.
Mayor Cantor?
Thank you, Mr. Davidoff. Thank you, Mr. Hart. Yeah, this is part of a successful community, is making sure that people can find what they need to find, but also it gives you some identity and placemaking, and all of those things are important. So I think this is a good use of ARPA money. It is an economic development, an important element in economic development. That's hard to say. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Cantor. Mr. Sweeney?
Yeah, and so I talked about this with a couple of folks. I know that we've been pushing on the development of the Mayflower parcel of land, and I'm looking through this. Doesn't seem to be any mention in that. I understand that we are looking at bonding for that, but I was just considering that that is going to be a hefty cost. I didn't know if there were parts of this process that we would be going through the development of that property that we might want to look at in allocation of the ARPA funding. And then lastly, I just wanted to tell Councilor Fay, I think these assistance to small businesses, I think a good place to look at. I think the mayor had looked at, I think East Windsor, was it, that had done a really interesting project where they had small businesses and nonprofits apply to the town for ARPA funding, and I think there's some clips on that too. So, but yeah, just to go back to the Mayflower piece, just kind of, Mr. Manager, could you just explain like the long-term plan if we're not using ARPA funding, how we're going to go about that?
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. Mr. Hart?
Matt Hart, Town Manager. Yes, happy to respond to that, Councilor Sweeney. So we didn't recommend anything for the new community center project as part of this initial round of ARPA funding for a couple of reasons. Number one, we don't know, we don't have a program or a design as of yet, and we do have the money available to conduct that visioning and feasibility study, and we'll be embarking upon that over the next year. And then secondly, we're not sure whether or not this would be clearly eligible for ARPA funds, and we may wish to fund it through the bond category. But we certainly saw that project as something that we would want to finance under this initiative in a year or so when we had more information.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Mr. Sweeney?
Thank you for that. Appreciate you guys keeping that top of mind, as you will likely hear me rinse and repeat that for a while. But thank you guys for your push on this. I really appreciate the input that you guys allowed for on this. And then secondly, I also really like the portion on the flood mitigation. I know that is a small dent in this big problem, but I know that it's good that the town is making an investment or a small down payment on a very large problem. But so thank you all for that.
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. Are there any other members of the council that would like to speak that aren't members of the committee? Mr. Gold? He's having difficulty being seen and heard.
Yes, if I may.
Yes,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Gold, you're
Thank you, Mr. Hart, for that.
Mr. Gold, you're going in and out, so perhaps you can call in to participate because it's very difficult. You're just like
I
spinning.
think he's supporting the an item on public wireless stations.
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. Right. So we'll just go to Mayor Cantor. Maybe she has something while he works on his connection. Mr. Gold, Miss Cantor.
No, I'm sorry, I don't have any. I wasn't raising my
Okay.
hand. Thank you so much.
Okay, no worries. I will go and say a few things. So with respect to the grants to the nonprofit and the business sector, Mr. Hart, I do appreciate the efforts that are going to be undertaken to make certain that we develop objective criteria so that it's a level playing field so that everybody understands the criteria and that we will have the necessary backup information in each application so that we won't have any issues as to whether or not it was done fairly. And I think that's a really great way to approach this entire process so that we can score each application, so to speak, so that at the end of the day, the process is transparent and fair to everybody who does apply. So I think that's really important. And the items that you mentioned with respect to retraining workers, retaining workers, making improvements to their physical space. I think those all fit into what I thought we had talked about. They would all have positive impacts in the long term for economic development for our community. With respect to the list here, I think the council has been told on several occasions that we need to expend the funds by 2026. So time sort of is of the essence as 2022 just rolls around the corner here. So I do applaud your efforts to reach out in a public information session to the stakeholders, whether they be butters or residents or business members, to understand the direction and the projects that we're thinking of taking. I think it's very important to engage our community. We take great pride in engaging them and having them have the opportunity to be heard. And those sessions would provide that opportunity. And whether or not we may learn from those sessions, better ideas may come because somebody may present them. But in no way does those particular public information centers sessions bind us with respect to proceeding forward or not proceeding forward. It's just a very good way to for government at a local level to reach out to the people who live in the community or have a stake in the community to express their concerns or their viewpoints, whether pro or con, with respect to the various items that are definitely going to have an impact on our community for generations to come. And lastly, with respect to the wayfinding, I find that when I'm in communities that have unified looks to them, that when you're in that community, you just tend to look for that type of symbol or that kind of signage to make certain that, oh, that's the public parking area, that's where a public park is, that and it really makes you feel very welcome, and it also will assist the private sector will sort of piggyback on that in terms of publications and things that they will present to their client base as well, to say, yeah, you just look for this here. It's right there. So it's a win-win for the entire community. So thank you for putting that on the list as well. Mr. Gold, I see you're back. I don't know if you have Wi-Fi capability.
Trying through my office, but just if you can't hear.
It's scattered. I will. There will be more to come, Mr. Gold.
Very quickly, I just wanted to.
Lee, try turning your video off and your audio on.
Now I'm out.
I think we can hear you.
Proceed, Mr. Gold. I think we can hear you.
Apologize for the inconvenience here. I just, if you can hear me, I
We can
was
hear you fine.
curious. Okay, great. I ironically enough, as Liam did mention it, I was curious about business development side in dealing with offering Wi-Fi in economic hubs as part of the business development, whether or not that would be something that we'd be looking at through the ARPA funds, as well as maybe expanding a little bit on the discussion with how we can apply it to the stormwater improvement in town.
We sort of caught most of what you said. So, Mr. Hart, did you want to add anything to Mr. Gold's concerns? I think he, from what I heard, he was asking about public Wi-Fi in business centers and something about the flood water mitigation.
Yes, Matt Hart, Town Manager, happy to answer respond to your questions, Councilor Gold. With respect to Wi-Fi initiatives, we do have some built into the plan, certainly to promote broadband in our public places, our parks, Blue Black Square, West Hartford Center, etc. I know that's been a priority of members of the council for some time now. We're also going to look to enhance capacity in our existing facilities, and to the extent key business hubs, key commercial areas, etc. We could let us give that some more thought, in terms of what we think they need. Maybe it's at a starting point performing an assessment of current capacity, when we look at our 5 primary commercial areas as an example. So I'm happy to discuss that with our IT director, Mr. Moran, as well as Ms. Gorski, our economic development coordinator. So thank you for your good suggestion there. And then with respect to the stormwater funding, what we would plan to focus on initially is really that those key areas we've studied, what we have referred to as the feet area in the north central part of our town, to start funding the design and some initial improvements in that particular area. And then I think another area of focus will be upgrading some of our existing culverts to make them larger, such as the ones in the vicinity of the former UConn campus. And if we were to do that, we would be able to provide relief to some of those neighborhoods rather quickly. So that's where we would suggest spending this initial allocation of stormwater funding. So I hope that covers both your questions there. And thank you for the suggestion.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Does anyone have anything further on this agenda item? So, Mr. Hart, Mr. Hart.
So I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, perhaps Matt Hart, Town Manager, perhaps you were just going to do this, but the direction moving forward, sounds like the committee is comfortable with us conducting some number of public information sessions. We can explore Mr. Gold's idea as well, or that question.
That's exactly where I was going to start. So mind reading was pretty good tonight. So thank you. And then I guess with respect to whatever needs to get onto council agendas, we work in consultation with the mayor in terms of getting it on the agenda.
Will do.
Thank you. We'll move on to item C, which is the equity officer position, which would be a special assistant to the town manager. Mr. Hart.
Thank you, Matt Hart, Town Manager again. We had an initial conversation with the committee regarding this new position at your meeting last month, and we agreed to carry it over as a continuing business item to this meeting because you didn't have much of an opportunity to look at it as of yet. Again, we're very excited about the potential here. We appreciate the support from the town council, your leadership in putting it into the current year's budget. Our HR team, Mr. Ledwith and Ms. Lombardi, have worked and prepared the job description with some input from me. We did look at examples, as Mr. Ledwith said last time, from other like communities around the country. So I know Mr. Ledwith is here with us tonight. Rick, wasn't sure if there was anything key you wanted to add before we opened it up for input and questions from committee members and council.
Thanks, Matt. You know, as you can see throughout the job description, this leader of equity, as we'll call it, will not only work with our town leadership team and all of our employees to promote equity and inclusion throughout the organization, but will also be a resource to our community, various boards and committees who represent the town of West Hartford. So this person will engage our workforce and committees in dialogue around racial and social equity and what it means to West Hartford to be a welcoming organization and community. As I think I mentioned a couple of weeks ago as well, we do have a strategy, as Matt had said as well, in place to begin recruiting for this person, which will include local and regional conferences and municipalities, ICMA, Indeed, of course. Our educational network will be a resource as well, in addition to our consultants who have access to a good pool of candidates that we can consider as well. So we would be happy to answer any questions that the committee may have about the job description.
Thank you, Mr. Ledwith. Does any member of the committee have any questions? Mayor Cantor.
Yes, I do need a little more time with it. I'm not ready to say go ahead yet. But I don't know if anybody else feels that way. I just want to just process it a little bit. That's that. And I don't know if there was any other groups that you wanted to make sure reviewed it to make sure that whether it's, I don't know, but I just don't know if there's, whether it's, I'm not sure the group. Yes, Mr. Hart. Actually, I'm not the chair. Sorry, Mr. David.
No worries, Madam Mayor. Mr. Hart.
Thank you, Matt Hart, Town Manager again. Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Ledwith, I believe you probably did get some input from some of your colleagues in the public schools, perhaps Dr. Haskins in particular.
We have, and we, as Matt said, Rick Ledwith, Executive Director of HR through the chair. We have had our resources vet the job description, but certainly would be open to other town committees reviewing it as well if the committee felt that would be necessary.
Thank you, Ms. Cantor.
I'm not sure it's necessary as much as it is, I think would be appreciated. So that's but I can talk offline with Matt about this. But I just think it might, rather than rushing it, I'd rather people be able to have a review, just to make sure that this is in line with expectations.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Cantor. Anyone else have any questions or comments?
Leon, Mr. David, through you, this is Mary Fay. Um, recognizing that this is an important position that a lot of organizations are adding uh, or staffing, my question would be, and I think maybe Mayor Cantor was going in this direction a little bit. Is there a way that we can somehow offset the budget increase because we've added some other staffing, recognizing the importance of this job and person to make it, not just an additional cost that's going to keep rolling forward. So, again, I acknowledge the importance, but just wondering if there's a way to offset the ongoing yearly cost. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. White. It's my understanding in the last budget adoption, the council decided that the position of a diversity, inclusion, and equity officer was paramount to our organization, and we funded it as a full-time position. And I believe that was something that was discussed quite at length at the council meeting. So it still remains my hope and intent that we will continue in that vein going forward. I would concur with Mayor Cantor that since many organizations, not only in Connecticut but across the nation, are seeking people to fulfill this role in their organizations, that perhaps we should make certain that our job description lines up with those that we are competing with, just in case, just as a double check to make certain that we're definitely not missing something. Because I do believe that the individual that we get here will be joining an excellent team of leaders, and people will be looking to us to see what criteria we use to recruit this individual, because this role is so important and critical for our organization. And if we don't see any further commentary on this item, I would suggest we move on to item D, which is a general fund projection as of 9/30, 2021. Mr. Privatera.
Mr. Chairman, Pete Privatera, Finance Director, my apologies. We had hoped to complete the analysis and present it tonight. However, there was some additional information that I felt it was important to take one more look at it. I'll plan on having it completed over the next few days, but I didn't feel it was ready to be submitted to council for a full discussion at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Privatera, for your candor. I think the committee does appreciate the fact that we'd rather get a detailed, accurate report than have something that is still a work in progress. So we'll just hold off on this until our next meeting, and we can go from there. I served long enough to know that the first quarter of the fiscal year, there's a lot of moving parts, and there's a lot of adjustments, and so it's quite understandable that we would find ourselves in this position this evening. So thank you, Mr. Privatera, for that explanation. Okay, so we'll move right on to, there's no communications. We'll move on to staff reports, and that would be Mr. Ledwith with respect to human resources.
Thank you, Chair David Off. Rick Ledwith, Executive Director of Human Resources. In the interest of time, I'll highlight a couple of areas of our report. First, recruitment activity remains at a very high level, with over a dozen open recruitments ongoing and several new hires coming on board over the last several weeks. We do have 3 leadership recruitments that are in process. So we have 2 internal promotional opportunities, both taking place in public safety. We have 1 assistant police chief recruitment ongoing and 1 assistant fire chief recruitment that's ongoing. And then we have our library director recruitment that is being led by our library board, with the first round of interviews taking place last week. So we'll get an update from the library board shortly in terms of how those went. I know they had 2 sets of interviews going on over the course of the week for that first round. And then as a follow-up to our earlier conversation about our equity officer position, our diversity, equity, and inclusion training continues throughout the organization. Our consultant has provided training for our Public Works Department on October 7th, and we will train our remaining non-public safety full-time employees in December. And then we will begin working with our police chief and fire chief to strategize on how best to train our fire and police personnel to start the year in 2022. That's a quick summary of our report. Be happy to answer any questions that the committee has regarding those issues or any of the other issues that were outlined in the report.
Thank you, Mr. Ledwith. Thank you for presenting us with a very extensive report that did appear in board docs. I do see that Mayor Cantor does have a question. Mayor Cantor.
Thank you, Mr. Davidoff. I would like to close. I don't want to leave this open-ended, the DEI position. So, I mean, I don't think we would put our stamp of approval on it tonight. I'd give it a little bit more time. I personally need a little more time with it. That's one of the things I'm asking for. But maybe outreach to some people in the community and doing just with my own comfort, and maybe other people feel the same. I'm not sure. But I would say that we do want to move quickly with it. So what I would say is that if there are any significant changes, we bring it back to the group. If there aren't, that we authorize that town staff move forward with it after we have had a week or two to to process it. Thoughts?
Thank you, Mayor Cantor.
Through you,
I have
Chairman
no
Davidoff,
objections.
Rick Ledwith, Executive Director of HR. That would be great. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Ledwith. Yeah, I would concur with Mayor Cantor's suggestion. I think it makes a lot of sense. Anything further? I did just get a text from Mr. Gold. He concurs as well. Seeing nothing else, thank you, Mr. Ledwith, for your very complete and extensive report. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Our town clerk is not here this evening, and everyone can read her report. It's on board docs. It's still remains. It looks like it's a very busy office with respect to daily interaction with residents, still with land recordings, and at this time of year, very busy with the election and election responsibilities as well. And if you notice, the call volume into the town clerk's office is quite steady on a daily basis. So with that, the last item that we do have on tonight's agenda is a report from Mr. Moran on information technology. Mr. Moran.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jared Moran, CIO. Most of my report is pretty much business as usual, but of particular note, I did really want to call attention to some great news for West Hartford, the application for ECF funding. The Emergency Connectivity Fund is a fund designed for schools and libraries to help close the homework gap, also known as the digital divide. We're still in the initial throes of this, but basically this is a significant contribution to West Hartford, $810,000 yearly in round one to support Chromebook and hotspot funding. So that we're very excited about. And as I learn more, I will share this with you.
That is very, very good news. I really appreciate it. But I do have one question that has nothing to do with the report. I see lots of paper boxes behind you, and you're our CIO, so I'm just a little concerned about that. But, I'm certain maybe you're just getting rid of them because
I should have used a filter. I'm actually officeless right now. We're doing some minor renovations to build an office for our new IT manager. So I'm working out of the break room.
All right, but no, it's a good segue to say thank you for all your hard work, and it probably just shows us that we're putting our technology to use, and you don't need all those paper boxes any further because we have our technology and our information up in the cloud somewhere. Exactly. So thank you. But I just looked at it and I thought it was a great background, and sometimes we need a little levity to these meetings. Mr. Sweeney.
Through you, Mr. Davidoff. Just a quick question. So, Jared, and that is through both Matt as well. Are we going to be using this kind of as a reimbursement to the district because we made a significant purchase of these during COVID, right? Is that my right on that? Sort of.
It's interesting because as we read it, it's like reimbursement for past purchases, but through future purchases. So we're still working with our consultant to kind of figure that out. I think the direct discounts might actually even come from the vendor. Like we'll just get like $0 invoices to get devices to help make us whole. So we're still working on those details.
And does that, Matt, does that impact kind of previous, are we going to see like returns to the general fund on that because we're getting reimbursed on that or no?
Matt Hart, Town Manager. I suspect, and Mr. Moran can confirm, it will just provide us with some future budget savings. So we'll be able to utilize this funding source to obtain with equipment in the future because we're constantly replacing it. So it'll alleviate budget pressure in future years.
Okay. Thank you. That's excellent.
Mr. Sweeney? Okay. Anything further for Mr. Moran? Mayor Cantor.
I just want to thank Jared for his work on this because it was fast and furious, I know, to get the work done. So appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Cantor. Yeah, kudos. It just the dividends that it will pay in the long term are just amazing. So thank you. Anyone else have any questions or comments for Mr. Moore? Seeing none or hearing none. This is the last meeting of this term for the Finance Administration Committee. It has been my pleasure to chair it for the past 2 years. It's kind of amazing that we were meeting in person for about 2 meetings, and then we just went to this virtual way of doing it. And I think we did a great job. We were able to have our budget workshops done this way. People were able to use the technology so that we did not need to be in the same room as each other, but we were able to have a very robust, lively, and civil discussion about the various items that were in the budget. And the committee has been able to continue its work even though we're not sitting around a conference room table in the glass room at Town Hall. So thank you, everyone, for being present and for participating. Our residents are better off and our town is better off. And to all the professionals in our town staff, thank you for the many hours of preparation that you undertake to get us to the point of where we are this evening. It may seem to those watching that, wow, they don't seem to have a lot of in-depth discussions, but there's a lot of materials that are presented to us that we have the ability to read prior to the meeting and to ask town staff prior, so that we just really concentrate on those issues that may be unclear, or there may be differences of opinion on how to handle it. So thank you all for taking your time. I appreciate the fact that some of these meetings that used to take place at 8 o'clock in the morning have taken place in the evening, and I do understand that it's well past the hours that one would be expected to be in Town Hall. So I appreciate the time that you give to us away from your family. Mayor Cantor.
I just want to, as previous chair of this committee, I just want to thank you, Leon, Mr. Davidoff, for doing a great job. But it's sincerely appreciated. This is a really important committee. They all are. But there's a lot that goes through this committee. And your leadership you've been very thoughtful, thorough, and much appreciate all of your effort.
Thank you. And at this point, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Sweeney.
So moved.
Okay, Ms. Fay, is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. We stand adjourned. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thanks, Leon.
Thank you.